I grew up believing I was the luckiest girl in the world. The Williams family was picture perfect, at least that's what everyone said. Our colonial house sat on Maple Street with its pristine white picket fence, manicured lawn, and my mother Linda's prize-winning rose garden. Every Sunday, we'd pile into Dad's Mercedes for church, looking like we'd stepped out of a magazine. Michael Williams, successful attorney, Linda Williams, real estate queen, Jessica Williams, the golden child, and me, Patricia Williams, the responsible one. But perfection, I learned, is just another word for prison. The cracks started small, almost invisible, like how Mom would light up when Jessica walked into a room, her whole face transforming with this radiant smile I never seemed to inspire. Or how Dad would ruffle Jessica's hair and call her princess while giving me an approving nod for my straight A's. "Patricia's so responsible," they'd tell their friends. "We never have to worry about her." It felt like praise back then. I didn't understand it was actually a life sentence. Jessica was 3 years younger, but somehow always seemed to need more. More attention when she scraped her knee. More celebration when she got a B+ while my A+ was expected. More comfort when boys broke her heart. More money for her creative pursuits, while my practical business classes were a good investment in your future, honey. She was the sun everyone orbited around, and I was the dependable moon, always in her shadow, reflecting her light. I remember the exact moment I should have seen the truth. Jessica was 18, I was 21, and she'd just gotten into state university with a partial scholarship. The family was celebrating at our favorite Italian restaurant when she announced she wanted to study art instead of the pre-med track she'd told the scholarship committee. "But sweetie," Mom said gently, "you know art doesn't really pay the bills." "Patricia could help," Jessica said, twirling her pasta fork. "She's always talking about starting that consulting business. She could support me until I get established." The entire table went quiet. Dad set down his wine glass. Mom's eyes got that bright, expectant look they always got when Jessica had an idea. "That's actually brilliant," Dad said slowly. "Patricia, you've got that head for business. You could help Jessica pursue her passion without the pressure of immediate financial returns." I felt something cold slide down my spine. "But I was going to use my savings to—" "Family first, Patty," Mom interrupted, using the nickname that always made me feel diminished. "Jessica has such a gift. We can't let money crush her artistic spirit." And just like that, it was decided. My consulting business fund became Jessica's art school allowance. My dreams were practical enough to wait. Hers were too precious to postpone. But I convinced myself it was temporary. I convinced myself it was love. The pattern repeated through our 20s. Jessica would have a crisis, a breakup, a failed art show, a period of finding herself. And somehow, Patricia would provide the solution. When Jessica wanted to move to New York, I co-signed her lease. When her gallery fired her for chronic lateness, I helped pay her rent while she figured things out. When she decided she was more of an entrepreneur than an artist, I helped fund her jewelry business that lasted exactly 4 months. Each time, my parents praised my generosity. Each time, Jessica would hug me and promise this was the last time. Each time, I felt like I was drowning just a little bit more. The jewelry business failure should have been my wake-up call. Jessica had taken the initial $15,000 I'd given her and somehow run up another $30,000 in debt. When she called crying about creditors threatening legal action, Mom and Dad immediately looked to me. "You're so good with money, Patricia," Dad said during our family dinner. "Surely you can help Jessica restructure this debt." "I can't keep—" I started. "She's your baby sister," Mom said softly. "And she's been through so much stress. You know how sensitive she is." That word, sensitive. It was Jessica's get-out-of-jail-free card, her shield against consequences, her excuse for every failure, and my responsibility for every solution. I was strong enough to handle disappointment. Jessica was too sensitive. I could sacrifice because I was practical. Jessica needed protection because she was an artist. I could wait because I was patient. Jessica needed immediate help because she was fragile. I restructured her debt. I always did. By the time I was 28, I had built a small consulting firm from nothing, While Jessica flitted between careers and creative phases, I was working 60-hour weeks, building client relationships, creating something real. My first major breakthrough came when I developed a new customer retention strategy that increased client revenue by 300%. It was groundbreaking work, the kind that could make a career. I was excited to share it with the family. Finally, something that was undeniably mine, indisputably successful. I brought the presentation to Sunday dinner, spreading my charts and graphs across Mom's dining table with pride. Jessica glanced at my work while picking at her salad. "This is really smart, Patty," she said. "You always were the analytical one." 2 weeks later, Jessica announced she was pivoting again. This time, she was going into business consulting. "I've been studying Patricia's strategies," she told a room full of potential investors, my strategies displayed on her laptop screen. "And I've developed some innovative approaches to customer retention." The numbers on her presentation looked familiar, the methodology looked familiar, even some of the language looked familiar. Because it was mine. All of it. When I confronted her, Jessica's eyes filled with tears. "I thought you'd be happy for me," she whispered. "I learned so much from watching you work. Isn't imitation the sincerest form of flattery?" "You didn't imitate, Jessica. You copied, word for word." "That's not—" She took a shaky breath. "I added my own creative touch. You know I've always been the creative one. You're so literal, Patty. Can't you see how we could work together? Your brain, my presentation skills." When I refused to validate her theft, Jessica went to our parents. By the time she finished explaining her version of events, I was the selfish sister who wouldn't share her basic business knowledge with family. I was holding Jessica back out of jealousy. I was being territorial about information that wasn't that revolutionary anyway. "Business is business, Patricia," Dad said when I tried to explain. "But family is forever. Don't let money come between you and your sister." The investors loved Jessica's presentation. She got $200,000 in seed funding for my ideas, while I watched my own consulting firm struggle to get meetings. Apparently, Jessica's version of my strategies was more innovative and presented with such passion. That's when I realized something that should have been obvious years earlier. I wasn't the favorite daughter learning to share. I wasn't the strong sister helping the weak one. I was the family ATM, the designated sacrifice, the one whose dreams were always expendable because everyone else's were more important. But understanding and escape are two very different things. The systematic destruction of Patricia Williams happened slowly, then all at once. Jessica's business consulting firm, built on my stolen strategies, began winning contracts that should have been mine. Clients who had been interested in my services suddenly found Jessica's approach more dynamic. The business community was small, and Jessica had always been charismatic in a way I apparently wasn't. "She just has this energy," one potential client told me after choosing Jessica's firm over mine. "This warmth that makes you trust her vision." My revenues plummeted while Jessica's soared, and somehow this became my fault too. "Maybe you're not cut out for the sales side," Mom suggested during one of our increasingly tense family dinners. "You're so thorough, so detail-oriented. Maybe you should consider working for Jessica? She could use someone with your analytical skills." The suggestion hit me like a physical blow. Work for Jessica, using my own stolen strategies, watching her get credit for my innovations while I filed her paperwork. "I have my own company," I said quietly. "A struggling company," Dad pointed out. "While Jessica's firm is thriving. Pride goeth before a fall, Patricia. Maybe it's time to be practical." Practical. There was that word again. Jessica got to be creative, passionate, artistic, sensitive. I got to be practical. Jessica, for her part, played the concerned sister perfectly. "I hate seeing you struggle, Patty," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "You know I'd take care of you. We're family. Take care of me, with my own work, using my own ideas." While she got the credit, the success, the admiration of our parents who couldn't see what was right in front of them, the isolation was surgical in its precision. When I complained about Jessica using my strategies, I was being petty. When I pointed out the identical language in our presentations, I was being legalistic. When I struggled to compete with my own stolen work, I was being stubborn and too proud to accept help. Slowly, systematically, Jessica convinced everyone that my failure was a character flaw rather than the result of her sabotage. I was jealous of her success. I was bitter about her natural advantages. I was too rigid to adapt to changing markets. "You've always been so competitive with Jessica," Mom said one afternoon when I tried, again, to explain what was happening. "Even when you were little, you couldn't stand it when she got attention. Maybe this is really about dealing with those old feelings?" Old feelings. As if my objection to intellectual theft was really just unresolved sibling rivalry. As if watching my life's work fuel someone else's success was just petty jealousy that I needed to outgrow. The financial pressure mounted. Without new clients, I couldn't pay my office rent. Without an office, I couldn't meet with potential clients professionally. Without professional meetings, I couldn't win new business. The spiral was perfectly designed and completely devastating. Jessica, meanwhile, was featured in the local business journal as Young Entrepreneur of the Year. The article praised her innovative approaches to customer retention and her natural business instincts. There was a photo of her in my old office building, the one I'd had to leave when I couldn't make rent, shaking hands with the mayor. I bought 10 copies of that magazine. I don't know why. Maybe I thought if I stared at it long enough, the cosmic injustice would somehow become visible to everyone else. Maybe I hoped the universe would develop a sense of irony. Maybe I was just torturing myself. The final betrayal came on a Tuesday in March. I was at Mom and Dad's house, having been summoned for what I thought was a family dinner. Instead, I found them sitting at the kitchen table with serious expressions and a folder full of documents. "We need to talk," Dad said. The conversation that followed would replay in my mind for years. They'd been watching my struggles and consulting with Jessica about how to help me. They'd decided I needed tough love to motivate me to get my life together. "We're cutting off your emergency fund access," Mom said gently, as if this was somehow compassionate. "And we won't be able to help with your rent anymore." The emergency fund was money I'd contributed to for years, back when I had money to contribute. The rent help was the difference between having an apartment and sleeping in my car. "Jessica thinks this will motivate you to stop dwelling on past grievances and focus on moving forward," Dad explained. "She's offered to help you find a position with her firm once you've had some time to adjust your attitude." Adjust my attitude. About having my life's work stolen. About watching my career destroyed by my own family's collaboration with my saboteur. About being blamed for my own destruction while being offered a job working for my destroyer. "This is about helping you grow," Mom added. "Jessica has shown such maturity in how she's handled your difficulties. She doesn't hold grudges about your accusations. She just wants to help." The room felt like it was spinning. Jessica had convinced our parents that my objection to theft was an attitude problem that needed correction. She'd positioned herself as the magnanimous sister offering employment to her bitter, jealous sibling. She'd turned my destruction into evidence of her superiority and my need for her salvation. "You've always been the strong one," Dad said. "We know you can handle this. You just need the right motivation. Strong enough to handle being robbed. Strong enough to handle being blamed for it. Strong enough to handle losing everything while watching my thief prosper. Strong enough to be grateful for the opportunity to work for her afterwards." I walked out of that house knowing I would never walk back in. The descent was swift and merciless. Without family support and with a destroyed business reputation, I lost my apartment within 2 months. My car became my office, my bedroom, my dining room. I parked behind grocery stores and used their bathrooms, bought day passes to the gym for showers, ate ramen noodles with water heated in coffee shop microwaves. The physical hardship was nothing compared to the psychological warfare. Jessica called occasionally, her voice dripping with concern. "Patty, you're being so stubborn. Just come work with me. You're literally choosing to be homeless instead of accepting help." Accepting help, that's what she called it. Working for the person who stole my life, using my own innovations to make her rich while I earned a fraction of what my work was worth. And somehow refusing this generosity, made me the unreasonable one. Mom and Dad sent cards, thinking of you. We love you. You know what you need to do. As if love was conditional on my surrender. As if family meant accepting abuse with gratitude. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday in October. I was parked behind a McDonald's trying to work on a laptop with a dying battery when my phone rang. It was Mom. "Patricia, this has gone on long enough," she said without preamble. "Jessica's firm is doing so well she's expanding. She's offering you a management position. Full benefits, good salary. You'd practically be a partner. A partner in my own stolen company, using my own stolen strategies, under the supervision of my thief. She's being incredibly generous considering how you've treated her," Mom continued. "She could hold a grudge about all your accusations, but she just wants her sister back. All my accusations, as if intellectual theft was just a misunderstanding, as if systematic sabotage was just a difference of perspective. And frankly, Patricia, you're not getting any younger. This pride of yours is going to leave you old and alone. Is that really worth it? Is being right more important than being happy?" Being right more important than being happy. The final gaslighting masterpiece. My refusal to enable my own destruction was pride. My insistence on basic justice was stubbornness. My unwillingness to work for my saboteur was choosing misery over happiness. I hung up the phone and screamed until my throat was raw. That night, parked behind a gas station with rain drumming on my car roof, I faced the truth I'd been avoiding for months. This wasn't temporary hardship that would resolve when justice prevailed. This wasn't a misunderstanding that would clear up when the facts became obvious. This was my new reality, designed and maintained by people who claimed to love me. I had become the family scapegoat so completely that my destruction was seen as my own fault, my resistance was seen as mental illness, and my thief was seen as my savior. The narrative was set. Jessica was the successful daughter who graciously offered to help her bitter, jealous sister. I was the failed daughter whose pride prevented her from accepting love. I could either accept this reality or disappear entirely. That was the night Patricia Williams, the family scapegoat, died in a gas station parking lot in the rain. What emerged from that car the next morning was someone else entirely. Someone who understood that sometimes the only way to win a rigged game is to stop playing it altogether. I drove to the public library and started researching everything I could about narcissistic family systems, scapegoating, and stolen valor. I read about golden children and lost children, about triangulation and gaslighting, about families that sacrifice one member to maintain the illusion of perfection. For the first time in my life, what I was experiencing had names, had patterns, had been studied and documented and understood. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't jealous. I wasn't bitter or stubborn or proud. I was the designated family failure, chosen to absorb all the dysfunction so everyone else could feel successful and healthy and good. And I was done. The library became my sanctuary, my university, my launching pad. For 3 months, I lived in my car and spent every waking hour researching not just family dysfunction, but business law, intellectual property rights, and strategic planning. The homeless shelter downtown let me shower twice a week, and the librarians pretended not to notice when I fell asleep at the computer terminals. Dr. Sarah Chen was the first person who looked at my story and didn't tell me I was overreacting. The Community Mental Health Center offered sliding scale therapy, and I qualified for the lowest tier. During our first session, I laid out everything: the stolen strategies, the family isolation, the systematic sabotage. I waited for her to suggest I was being dramatic, that families were complicated, that maybe I should consider Jessica's perspective. Instead, she leaned forward and said, "Patricia, what you're describing is textbook scapegoating in a narcissistic family system. You weren't imagining any of it." Those words hit me like a physical force. You weren't imagining any of it. For the first time in years, someone with credentials was telling me that my reality was real, my perceptions were accurate, my pain was justified. But the good news, Dr. Chen continued, is that now you know what you're dealing with, and knowledge is power. We spent months unpacking the patterns, how I'd been assigned the role of family fixer before I was old enough to understand what was happening, how every generous act I'd performed had actually been a boundary violation I'd been conditioned to accept, how Jessica's sensitivity was weaponized manipulation and my parents' concern was emotional abuse disguised as love. Scapegoats often have one advantage, Dr. Chen told me during our 10th session. They develop incredible resilience and problem-solving skills because they have to. You survived this system for 30 years. That takes remarkable strength. The anger came next, and it was magnificent. Not the desperate, flailing rage I'd felt in the parking lot, but something colder, more focused. I was furious at Jessica for the theft and manipulation. I was furious at my parents for enabling and participating in my destruction. But mostly, I was furious at myself for accepting it all for so long. Anger is just pain with direction, Dr. Chen said. What matters is what you do with it. What I did was make a plan. The legal research had revealed something beautiful. Jessica's theft of my consulting strategies constituted intellectual property violation, breach of fiduciary duty, and fraudulent business practices. The documentation was all there. My dated files, her identical presentations, the timeline of theft, and my subsequent business failure. I'd been so focused on family dynamics that I'd forgotten I had legal recourse. I spent my last $300 on a consultation with a business attorney who specialized in intellectual property theft. Marcus Rodriguez looked through my documentation with increasingly raised eyebrows. "This is cut and dried," he said finally. "She didn't even try to hide it. The question is whether you want to pursue damages or just an injunction to stop her using your work." "Damages," I said without hesitation. "All of them." Marcus worked on contingency, which was the only way I could afford him. The lawsuit filing took 6 months to prepare, but it was worth the wait. We didn't just go after Jessica's business. We went after everyone who'd knowingly used stolen intellectual property. Her investors, her major clients, the business incubator that had featured her in their success stories. The settlement was for $300,000 in damages plus an additional $150,000 in legal fees. Jessica's firm collapsed within weeks of the lawsuit becoming public. Turns out, when your entire business model is based on stolen work, removing the foundation brings down the whole structure. But the money wasn't the real victory. The real victory was watching the narrative crumble. Suddenly, Jessica wasn't the successful entrepreneur with natural business instincts. She was the thief who'd built her empire on her sister's stolen work. The local business community, which had celebrated her as a rising star, now whispered about her questionable practices and family drama. The mayor's office quietly removed her photo from their young entrepreneur wall. I used the settlement money strategically. First, I paid Dr. Chen for private sessions so I could continue therapy without sliding scale delays. Second, I hired a small business consultant who specialized in rebuilding after setbacks. Third, I put a down payment on a small office space. Nothing fancy, but legitimate and professional. The real game changer came when Marcus introduced me to his wife, Elena Rodriguez, who worked in hotel development. Over dinner, she mentioned that several prime hospitality properties were struggling due to poor management. "The owners have the capital, but not the operational expertise," she said. "They need someone who understands customer retention and service optimization." Customer retention. My specialty. The work Jessica had stolen and bastardized. Within a year, I'd transformed 2 failing boutique hotels into profitable operations using refined versions of my original strategies. The hospitality industry was different from consulting, but the fundamental principles were the same. Understand what customers truly value, exceed their expectations, and create systems that encourage loyalty. The third hotel I consulted for was the Grandview, a historic property downtown that had been hemorrhaging money for 5 years. The owners were desperate enough to give me unprecedented authority to overhaul operations. 6 months later, the Grandview had a 6-month waiting list and was being featured in travel magazines. That's when Margaret Caldwell, the property owner, made me an offer I couldn't refuse. Patricia, I'm 78 years old and tired of worrying about hotel management, she said over lunch. You've tripled our revenue and turned us into a destination. I want to sell the Grandview to someone who understands its potential. Someone like you. The asking price was $2.8 million. I had the settlement money, a proven track record, and banks suddenly interested in my business plans. The loan approval process took 4 months, but on a Thursday in September, exactly 3 years after my family had cut me off, I became the sole owner of the Grandview Hotel. I spent the first year completely renovating and rebranding. The Grandview became the Grandview Boutique Hotel, a luxury property specializing in corporate events and intimate celebrations. Our tagline was, "Where every detail matters," and I meant it. We provided service so exceptional that guests felt guilty staying anywhere else. The business community took notice. Local magazines wanted to feature my turnaround story. The Chamber of Commerce invited me to speak about hospitality excellence. Corporate clients who'd once ignored my consulting firm were now booking their most important events at my hotel. I was profiled in the Business Journal as Entrepreneur of the Year. Ironic, considering Jessica had won the same award with my stolen work 5 years earlier. But this time, the innovation was undeniably mine, the success was completely earned, and the recognition was deeply satisfying. The ultimate test came during my second year of ownership. A corporate client wanted to book our largest event space for a birthday celebration. The budget was enormous, $150,000 for a single evening. It was exactly the kind of high-profile event that could establish the Grandview as the premier luxury venue in the city. I was reviewing the catering setup when my event coordinator approached, looking nervous. "Ms. Williams, we might have a situation," she said quietly. "The birthday girl just arrived for the venue walkthrough, and she's asking a lot of specific questions about ownership and management. She seems intense." I looked across the ballroom and felt the world shift into slow motion. Jessica Williams stood near the entrance, looking exactly like the golden child she'd always been. Designer dress, perfect hair, that radiant smile that could charm anyone within a 30-foot radius. She was gesturing animatedly to her event planner, examining floral arrangements and lighting fixtures with the proprietary air of someone accustomed to getting exactly what she wanted. She looked successful, confident, completely recovered from the collapse of her stolen business. Apparently, being exposed as a thief barely created a ripple in her charmed existence. I watched her for several minutes, memories flooding back. The little sister I'd adored and protected. The competitor who'd systematically destroyed my life. The golden child who'd turned my parents into enablers and accomplices. The thief who'd stolen my work and then offered me a job using it. And now she was here, in my hotel, spending someone else's money on her extravagant celebration, completely unaware that the woman whose life she'd destroyed was now the owner of the venue she'd chosen for her moment of triumph. The irony was so perfect, it felt scripted. I made a decision that would have been impossible 3 years earlier. Instead of confronting her, instead of announcing my presence, instead of letting emotion drive my response, I simply observed. I watched Jessica examine my work, the elegant lighting I'd designed, the flawless service protocols I'd implemented, the luxury experience I'd created from nothing. She was critical, of course. The flowers weren't quite right. The table arrangements needed adjustment. The catering presentation could be improved. She treated my staff with the casual dismissiveness I remembered from our childhood, when she'd ordered me around with the same entitled authority. "This will have to do," she told her event planner finally, "though I'm not impressed with the management's attention to detail. Make sure they understand this is a very important event. Attention to detail, in my hotel, built with my vision, managed with my standards." I went to my office and prepared. The night of Jessica's birthday party, I dressed carefully, not in designer clothes that would announce my success, but in the simple black suit I wore for hands-on event management. I wanted to look like exactly what Jessica would expect to see: efficient hotel staff managing her important celebration. The party was magnificent, if I do say so myself. Every element was perfectly executed according to my protocols. The service was seamless, The food was exceptional. The ambiance was flawless. Jessica's 150 guests were clearly impressed with the venue and the experience. I stayed in the background, overseeing operations, ensuring everything ran smoothly. Several times, Jessica passed close enough that I could have spoken to her, but she never really looked at the staff. We were invisible to her, just part of the machinery that made her special evening possible. The moment I'd been waiting for came near the end of the evening. Jessica was holding court near the bar, surrounded by admirers celebrating her success and sophistication. She was in her element, radiant and charming, basking in the attention and admiration she'd always craved. That's when I walked directly into her line of sight. I was checking the final cleanup details, making notes on my clipboard, when Jessica's gaze fell on me. For a split second, there was no recognition, just the casual dismissal she'd always shown towards service staff. Then her brain started processing what her eyes were seeing. The face was familiar, but the context was all wrong. Patricia should be... Where should Patricia be? Failing somewhere? Struggling with her stubbornness and pride. Certainly not here, certainly not competent and professional, certainly not managing the perfect evening Jessica was enjoying. I watched the recognition hit her like a physical blow. Her face went through a series of micro-expressions, confusion, disbelief, then a flash of something that might have been fear. "Patty?" she said, loud enough that several people nearby turned to look. I smiled professionally. "Good evening, Ms. Williams. I trust you're enjoying your celebration?" How are you? She was struggling to form complete sentences. "Are you working here?" "In a manner of speaking," I said calmly. Jessica's event planner appeared at her elbow, clipboard in hand. "Ms. Williams, we need to finalize the final payment authorization. Should I process the payment to the hotel owner?" "The hotel owner?" Jessica's voice was faint. "Yes, Ms. Patricia Williams. She'll need to approve the final billing." The silence that followed was beautiful. Jessica's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, shock, and something approaching terror. The people around her sensed drama and moved closer, their expressions shifting from polite party interest to genuine curiosity. "Patricia Williams," Jessica repeated slowly. "The hotel owner." "That's correct," I said pleasantly. "Is there anything else you need for your celebration? I want to ensure you have the perfect evening." The perfect evening. In my hotel, paid for with someone else's money, managed by the sister she'd destroyed, overseen by the woman she tried to turn into her employee. Jessica opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. For perhaps the first time in her life, she was completely speechless. "Your payment will be processed in the morning," I continued professionally. "Thank you for choosing the Grandview for your special celebration." I turned and walked away, leaving Jessica staring after me with her mouth slightly open and her birthday guests beginning to murmur among themselves. The aftermath was swift and comprehensive. By the next morning, word had spread through the business community that Jessica Williams had unknowingly held her $150,000 birthday party at her estranged sister's hotel. The sister she'd publicly feuded with, the sister who'd sued her for intellectual property theft, the sister who'd supposedly failed while Jessica succeeded. Except now, Jessica was the one paying for services, and Patricia was the one providing them. The power dynamic had completely reversed, and everyone could see it. The phone calls started within hours. First, Mom called, her voice tight with confusion and something that might have been panic. "Patricia, we need to talk about last night. Jessica is very upset." "I can imagine," I said calmly. "Is there anything specific you need to discuss?" "You humiliated her in front of all her friends. You could have told her you owned that hotel." "Why would I do that?" "She booked an event. I provided excellent service. That's how business works." "Don't be obtuse, Patricia. You know this isn't about business." She was right. It wasn't about business. It was about justice. It was about natural consequences. It was about watching someone who'd destroyed my life accidentally hand me $150,000 while their friends watched. Dad called next, his attorney voice in full effect. "Patricia, this vendetta needs to stop. Jessica made mistakes when she was younger, but this public humiliation serves no one." Mistakes when she was younger, as if systematic theft and sabotage were just youthful indiscretions that I should have outgrown resentment about. I provided professional hotel services for a client, I said. If Jessica feels humiliated by that arrangement, perhaps she should examine why. You're being deliberately cruel. Cruel. For succeeding. For building something. For letting my thief discover her victim's prosperity through natural consequences rather than explicit confrontation. Jessica herself called last, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. Patty, we need to talk. Can we meet somewhere private? I'm quite busy managing my hotel, I said, but you're welcome to book another event if you need our services. Please, I know I hurt you, but this has gone too far. People are talking. People are talking. Not, I'm sorry for destroying your life. Not, I want to make amends for stealing your work. Just concern about her reputation. What exactly would you like to discuss? I asked. I want to apologize. Really apologize. And I want to make things right between us. Things are right between us, Jessica. You needed event services. I provided them professionally. Our transaction is complete. That's not what I mean, and you know it. Then you'll need to be more specific about what you want. The pause was long. I want my sister back. Your sister is doing very well, thank you. She owns a successful hotel and no longer requires family assistance. I hung up. The community response was fascinating to watch. Some people were uncomfortable with what they saw as a calculated embarrassment. Others were openly admiring of the poetic justice. But the business community's reaction was unanimous. Respect. I had built something real from nothing. I had recovered from systematic sabotage and emerged stronger. I had provided impeccable service even to someone who'd wronged me, demonstrating professionalism that transcended personal history. The Hotel Association asked me to speak at their annual conference about building success after setbacks. The Chamber of Commerce invited me to join their board of directors. 3 different hospitality management companies offered to partner with me on expansion projects. More importantly, other scapegoats found me. People who'd been designated family failures, who'd been blamed for consequences they didn't create, who'd been told their perceptions were wrong and their pain was invalid. They came to my speaking events, sent emails, asked for coffee meetings. I started a quarterly workshop called Breaking Free: Recovery from Family Systems Abuse. Dr. Chen co-facilitated, providing clinical expertise while I shared practical strategies for rebuilding after scapegoating. The workshops filled up within hours of being announced. You're turning your pain into purpose, Dr. Chen observed during one of our now monthly check-ins. That's the deepest level of healing. The Grandview became more than a hotel. It became proof that victims can become victors without becoming perpetrators. That success is the best revenge, but only when it comes from authentic recovery rather than reactive spite. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do to someone who wronged you is to build a life so magnificent that their opinion becomes irrelevant. 6 months after Jessica's birthday party, I expanded into a second property. A year after that, I opened the Patricia Williams Institute for Hospitality Excellence, training programs that combined practical hotel management with organizational psychology and trauma-informed leadership. My parents never reached out directly, but I heard through mutual acquaintances that they'd begun describing the family situation differently. Instead of Patricia being the stubborn daughter who refused Jessica's help, the narrative had shifted to complicated family dynamics and both girls being strong-willed. It was progress, I suppose. Acknowledgement that maybe, possibly, I hadn't been entirely at fault for my own destruction. Jessica herself seemed to disappear from the local business scene. Her social media presence dwindled. The mutual friends stopped mentioning her in conversations. I didn't seek out information about her life, but the absence of her constant visibility suggested she'd either left town or retreated from the spotlight that had once sustained her. I felt no satisfaction in her diminishment, no triumph in her apparent retreat. I had learned the difference between justice and revenge, between consequences and cruelty. Jessica's downfall wasn't my victory. My success was my victory. On the 3-year anniversary of taking ownership of the Grandview, I hosted a celebration for my staff, my mentors, my therapy group, and the business community that had supported my recovery. The guest list included everyone who'd been part of my reconstruction except the family that had necessitated it. During my toast, I looked around the ballroom where Jessica had celebrated her birthday, where she'd unknowingly paid tribute to my resilience, where the final piece of justice had been served through her own choices rather than my manipulation. 3 years ago, I learned that the family you choose can be stronger than the family you're born into, I said to the assembled group. You've all been part of rebuilding not just a business, but a life. Thank you for showing me what healthy relationships actually look like. Dr. Chin caught my eye and smiled. Marcus and Elena Rodriguez raised their glasses. My hotel staff, who'd become the functional family I'd never had, cheered enthusiastically. Later that evening, as I walked through the empty ballroom where my transformation had been completed, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Complete peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of authentic power. Not the desperate need for validation, but the quiet confidence of someone who'd earned their success through genuine effort and ethical choices. The scared, desperate woman who'd slept in her car was gone. The family scapegoat who'd absorbed blame for everyone else's dysfunction was gone. The victim who'd allowed theft and manipulation because she'd been conditioned to sacrifice herself was gone. What remained was Patricia Williams, hotel owner, business leader, mentor, and survivor. Someone who'd learned that the best revenge against people who tried to make you small is to become magnificently, undeniably large. Someone who'd discovered that when you stop playing by rigged rules, you can create entirely new games where fairness actually exists. Someone who'd proven that recovery from family trauma isn't just about healing the wounds. It's about building a life so authentic and successful that the people who wounded you become irrelevant to your happiness. I turned off the lights and locked the doors of my hotel, my sanctuary, my proof that victims can indeed become victors when they have the courage to completely reinvent themselves. The girl who'd grown up believing she was lucky to be part of the Williams family was finally, truly gone. The woman who'd created her own definition of family had taken her place. And she was magnificent.